Hi, welcome to this video series on GMAT quantitative reasoning section preparation. Today our topic is work rate and we will be looking at data sufficiency type of question. Your GMAT exam has the quantitative reasoning section in which there are two types of problems, data sufficiency and problem solving. So, problem solving is your basic direct one question with 5 answer options. So, you have to select the one that suits the best, and data sufficiency is where you are given one question and two statements. You will have to judge whether the data given in those statements is sufficient to answer the question or not. So, these are the answer options for all data sufficiency type of questions. This will remain standard. It is good to learn them. So, you will not have to read them again and again in your every question while practicing or in your main exam. So, answer option A says when statement 1 alone is sufficient, but statement 2 alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Statement B, answer option B is when statement 2 alone is sufficient, but statement 1 alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Answer option C is when both statements together are sufficient, but neither statement alone is sufficient to answer the questions. And the answer option D is when each statement alone is sufficient to answer the questions. And answer option E is when statements 1 and 2 together are not sufficient to answer the question. So, let us look at some questions now. This is our first question. Machine R and machine S work at the respective constant rates. How much time does it take machine R working alone to complete a certain job? So, there is one machine R and there is one machine S, okay, and we need to find the rate of how much time does it take machine R to complete a certain job working alone. Okay. Statement 1 is telling us that the amount of time it takes machine S, that is the let rate be S, let rate be R for machines respectively R and S, and let the time taken be T R for machine R and T S for machine S. So, the first question is telling that amount it takes the amount of time it takes working alone to complete the job is 3/4 the time that it takes machine R to working alone to complete the job. Okay, we know that it is 3/4, but we do not know the time that is taken by machine S or machine R. So, we cannot calculate how much time does it take machine R. So, this alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Let us see what statement 2 is telling us. Statement 2 is telling us that machine R and machine S working together take 12 minutes to complete the job. That means that 1 by R plus 1 by S is equals to 1 by 12, but we do not know what R is or what S is. So, we cannot comment on the rate or the time taken by machine R and S. So, therefore, this is also insufficient. Combining statement 1 and statement 2. So, when T S is equals to 3/4 T R, we can the rate and the time are inversely proportional. So, R will be equals to 3/4 S. Substituting this into the statement 2 that we have 1 plus R plus 1 by S is equals to 1 by 2, you can solve for R and S, and thus you can also say what T R is, which is nothing but 1 by R, and therefore, together these are sufficient. You do not need to make the calculations, you just need to work it out till you can say that yeah, there are two variables and there are two equations. So, we can easily answer the question, it is sufficient to answer the question. So, which answer option is this? This is answer option C, when statement 1 alone is not sufficient to answer the question and statement 2 alone is not sufficient to answer the question, but statement 1 and 2 together are sufficient to answer the question. So, this is answer option C. Let us look at the next question now. S and T are two water pumps that run at constant rates. If pump T pumped alone, how many more hours would it take for it to finish pumping a large container than it would take for pump S to accomplish the same task by itself? Okay, there are two pumps S and T. We need to find the difference, that is how many more hours would it take pump S to accomplish the task by itself rather than pump T. Okay. So, what is the first statement? First statement tells us that when both the water pumps work together, they finish the pumping large container in 2/3 the times it takes pump S to finish the task alone. If it is 1 plus S plus 1 by T, these two pumps are working together, the time it is taking is equals to the work that is done W, but it is also equal to 1 by S. It is 2/3 and 1 by S into the time that this will take will be 3 by 2 times, because the time that they together take it is lesser as compared to time as working alone. So, 3 by 2 into time. So, when you cancel this out, you have 1 by T is equals to 3 by 2 into 1 by S minus 1 by S, which is equals to 1 by 2 S. Therefore, T is equals to 2 S, but we do not know S or T to calculate what is the amount of time, how many more hours would it take for finishing the large container than it would for pump S to accomplish the same task by itself. So, you cannot, this information is not sufficient. Let us look at answer the statement 2. Statement 2 is telling us that pump T is capable of pumping a large container in twice the time that it takes pump S to accomplish. So, 1 by pump T into time is equals to the time that S will take, it is taking twice the time that it takes pump S to accomplish the task alone. So, in reverse it will be time by 2 into S, it will take half the time, S is taking half the time. This again means time and time gets cancelled, 1 by T is equals to 1 by 2 S, which implies T is equals to 2 S. We are getting the same conclusion as above, and we have no information about T and S. So, this is also not sufficient to answer the question. Now, combine statement 1 and combine with statement 2, this is still not sufficient, because both are ending up giving the same information, that is T is equals to 2 S. So, when both are same, therefore, there is no conclusion, there is no information provided, not enough information provided to answer the question, therefore, this is also not sufficient. So, when statements 1 and 2 together are also not sufficient, what is the answer option? Answer option becomes E. E is when both statements together are also not sufficient to answer the question. Let us move to the next question now. If John produces n units of an item in T hours, what is the value of n? If John produces 4 more items per hour, he would take 1/4 lesser time to produce n units of the item. Okay. And statement 2 is telling us that if John increases his rate of production by 25%, the time taken by him to produce n items would be 80% of the original time. Okay. Let us see what John is producing n units of an item, n units in T hours. So, therefore, in 1 hour it will produce how many items? It will be equals to n by, it will be producing n by T units. So, statement 1, what does statement 1 tell us? Statement 1 tells us if John produced 4 more items per hour. So, per hour it is producing n by T initially, but they are saying if they produce 4 more. So, that is plus 4, he would take 1/4 lesser time to produce n units of the item. So, the T will be taken, the rate into time will be equals to the total. So, it is taking 1/4 lesser time. So, that means it is 3/4 of T, and it will produce how many units of the item? It will produce n units of the item. By solving this, you have 3/4 n plus 3T is equals to n, which implies 3T is equals to 1/4 of n, or n is equals to 12T. But we do not know the value of T. So, we cannot comment what is the value of n, calculate. Therefore, this information is insufficient to answer the question. Insufficient or not sufficient to answer the question. Statement 2 says, if John increases his rate of production by 25%, the time taken by him to produce n items would be 80% of the original time. So, if it is n by T is your efficiency, if it is increased by 25%, that is 1.25, it becomes 1.25 times, and takes then the time taken by him to produce n items would be 80% of the original time. So, 80% of the original time, that means 0.8 into the original time T will be equals to n. So, yes, 1.25 into 0.8 is nothing but equals to 1, and n by T into T, T gets cancelled, is equals to n. So, this is simple self-satisfying equation. It is not giving us any information about n or T. So, this is also insufficient, not sufficient to answer the question. Now, let us see if we combine statements 1 and 2 together, 1 plus 2. From 1 you have n is equals to 12t, and from 2 you have no information. It just is telling us that if the efficiency is increased by 25%, the time taken would be 80% of the original time, and n gets cancelled. It is nothing but an axiom. So, this n is equals to 12t is not information, not sufficient information to calculate anything about the value of n. So, therefore, the answer option becomes what? Answer option becomes E, when both statements together are also not sufficient to answer the question. Let us move to the next question now. A tank containing water started to leak. Did the tank contain more than 30 gallons of water when it started to leak? It is given that 1 gallon is equals to 128 ounces. Okay. Statement 1, what is statement 1 telling us? The water leaked from the tank at a constant rate of 6.4 ounces per minute. So, statement 1 is telling us that water leaked at the rate of 6.4 ounces per minute. So, with this, by giving us the rate at which it is leaking, there is no information about the amount of time it has taken to calculate how much volume has leaked. So, we cannot say that how much water, that how many gallons of water did it have when it started to leak. So, therefore, this information is not sufficient to answer the question. And what does statement 2 tell us? Statement 2 is telling us the tank became empty in less than 12 hours after it started to leak. So, time to empty will be less than 12 hours. So, here again we have nothing about how much is the rate to calculate how many in 12 hours how many ounces of water has leaked. So, this also is not sufficient information. Now, if you combine statement 1 and statement 2, you have that the rate of leakage is 6.4 ounces per minute, and you have that the time taken is less than 12 hours. Time is less than 12 hours. So, the amount that leaked would be 6.4 ounces per minute into 12 hours into 60 minutes divided by, converting this ounces to gallons, it will be divided by 128 will give you the number of gallons. So, the amount that will be leaked will be less than this. It has to be, the volume must be that leaked will be less than this, because in 12 hours this is the amount that would have leaked and it is emptying before that 12 hours. So, it is the volume is less than this expression. So, we can cancel out 0 and make 6.4 as 64, and 64 2s is 128 and 2 3s is 6. So, volume is less than 12 3s are 36. So, it can either be 30, it can be 29, it can be 31 also. So, it can be either greater than 30 or it can be less than 30. So, you cannot definitely tell us if the tank contained more than 30 gallons of water. It should just be less than 36, that is it. So, therefore, this together are also not sufficient to answer the question. So, therefore, answer option becomes E. E is when both together are also not sufficient to answer the question. So, answer option is E. Let us move to the next question now. Who takes less time to drive to work, Maria or Lupe? First statement is telling us that Maria drives to work in 20 minutes, but we do not know anything about Lupe's speed. So, statement 1 is insufficient. We know nothing about Lupe's how much time it takes and how much speed at which is going. And statement 2 says Lupe and Maria drive the same distance to work. Okay, you can calculate Maria's speed. You cannot calculate anything from this. They travel the same distance, but you don't know their speed to calculate the time that they take. So, this is also insufficient to answer the question. So, combining statements 1 and 2, you have that Maria drives to work in 20 minutes and Maria and Lupe drive the same distance, but there is no information about what speed that Lupe is driving with. So, you cannot comment on how much time it will take, whether it will take him lesser time or more time. You do not know the time taken by Lupe even in this. So, therefore, this together are also insufficient to answer the questions. Let us move to the next question now. Working together, Joe and Joanne finish a job in 2 hours. How long will it take Jeremy and Joe to finish the job? So, the first statement says that working alone and without breaks, Joe takes 5 hours to finish the job, which is 400% as long as the time it takes Jeremy to finish the job. And statement 2 says working alone and without breaks, Joanne takes 10 hours to finish 3 times the job. So, statement 1 is telling us, so initially together Joe and Joanne finish the job. Let us say Joe takes rate is x and Joanne's rate is y and Jeremy's rate is z. So, it is given that Joe and Joanne together finish the job in 2 hours. So, that means that 1 plus x by 1 plus y is equals to 1 by 2. And they are asking us how long will it take Jeremy and Joe to finish the job. Jeremy and Joe would be 1 plus x plus 1 by z is equals to what? Okay. Statement 1 is telling us working alone and without breaks, Joe takes 5 hours to finish the job, which is 400% as long as it takes Jeremy to finish the job. So, Joe takes 5 hours and Jeremy takes 400%, which is 400% that as long as it takes Jeremy to finish the job. Let us say Jeremy takes z hours. So, you are given that 400% will be 4 times Jeremy's speed is equals to 4 times Jeremy's time is equals to 5 hours. So, z is equals to 5 by 4 hours. So, therefore, since we know both Joe and Jeremy how much time they are taking, we can easily calculate. So, therefore, this is sufficient, you do not need to do the calculations, this is sufficient to calculate the question asked, that is how long will it take Jeremy and Joe to finish the job. Working alone and without breaks, Joanne takes 10 hours to finish 3 times the job. So, you only know about Joanne, you only know about y, that it takes 10 hours to finish 3 times the job. So, therefore, you can only calculate what the speed with which y is working, Joanne is working, but nothing about Joe and Jeremy. So, since already we know, so this is not sufficient to answer the question. So, now this means that the answer is answer option A, where statement 1 alone is sufficient to answer the question, but statement 2 alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Let us move to the next question now. Bill and Ted each had to paint half of a rectangular wall. If Bill finished his part of the job in 4 hours, how long did it take Ted to finish his half? Okay, statement 1 is saying Ted's rate of square feet painted per hour was 4/5 that of Bill. And statement 2 is saying the wall has an area of 5,000 square feet. So, the first statement is saying that there are 2 people, Bill and Ted. So, Bill finished his job in 4 hours. So, you know that Bill is finishing his hours in 4 hours, his work in 4 hours. Now, we need to know how much time did Ted take. So, Ted's rate is 4/5 that of Bill. So, the rate of Ted is 4/5 that of Bill. So, therefore, the time it takes will be, time that Ted takes will be 5 by 4, inversely proportional to the rate that Bill takes. So, 5 by 4 into 4 is equals to 5. So, there you go, you have calculated what is the time taken by Ted. Therefore, this was information was sufficient to answer the question. Now, let us look at second statement. The wall area is given as 5,000 square feet. This tells us nothing about the speed of Ted. Therefore, we cannot calculate how much time did Ted take to finish the his half. Therefore, this information is not sufficient to answer the question. And what is the answer option? Answer option is A in data sufficiency. Just remember the answer options. This answer option is A when statement 1 alone is sufficient to answer the question, but statement 2 alone is not sufficient to answer the question. Let us move to the next question now. Who types at a faster rate, John or Bob? The difference between their typing rates is 1 word per minute. Okay. So, we know that the difference, that is modulus of John minus Bob, is equals to 1 word per minute. but this tells us nothing about whether John is faster or Bob is faster, or their speeds, what their speeds are, what their rate is. So, therefore, this information is not sufficient to answer the question. Statement 2 is when Bob types at a rate of 80 words per minute. This is, they are giving us the rate of Bob, which is 80 words per minute, but still we do not know the John's rate. So, we cannot comment on who is typing faster, John or Bob. Therefore, this information alone is also not sufficient to answer the question. When you combine statement 1 with statement 2, we still do not know. We know that Bob is equals to 80, but we do not know whether John is 79 words per minute or it is 81 words per minute. It can be both, just the difference has to be 1 word per minute. So, therefore, from the difference you cannot calculate who was faster. Therefore, this information together are also not sufficient to answer the question, and that makes us the answer as answer option E, and statements 1 and 2 together are also not sufficient to answer the question. So, those were some sample questions on the topic of work and rate for data sufficiency type of questions. Hope they were clear. Thanks for watching.